You didn't just become comfortable being alone. You trained your brain to treat connection as a threat. And the disturbing part is, it probably feels like growth. Somewhere along the way, you told yourself you were becoming independent, self-sufficient, harder to hurt. But there's a quiet contradiction hidden inside that narrative. Because if independence were the full story, connection wouldn't feel exhausting now. It wouldn't feel invasive. It wouldn't trigger that subtle urge to withdraw the moment someone gets emotionally close. And yet, it does. Which raises an uncomfortable question most people never ask themselves. If loneliness used to hurt, why does connection feel dangerous now? There's a reason this shift happens, and it has very little to do with personality. It has everything to do with how the nervous system learns. Your brain is not designed to seek happiness. It's designed to avoid pain. And once it identifies something as a potential threat, it begins building protective circuitry around that perception. In neuroscience, this process is called threat conditioning. The nervous system records emotional experiences, especially rejection, abandonment, and humiliation, and stores them as survival data. Over time, your threat perception circuitry starts scanning for patterns, not consciously, automatically. So if connection repeatedly led to disappointment, betrayal, or emotional instability, your brain eventually stops treating closeness as reward. It starts categorizing it as risk. This is where attachment conditioning begins to quietly reshape identity. Psychologist John Bowlby, the pioneer of attachment theory, described how repeated relational experiences create internal working models of connection. These models act like invisible maps. They determine how safe or unsafe closeness feels long before conscious thought enters the picture. And once those maps form, they rarely announce themselves. They just start running the system. You might notice it as subtle discomfort when conversations become emotional, a quiet urge to change the subject, a reflex to keep people at arm's length, or the strange relief you feel when plans get canceled and you can retreat back into solitude. On the surface, it looks like preference. Underneath, it's nervous system preservation. The brain remembers what closeness cost you, so it begins protecting you from it. Imagine your mind like a house that once caught fire. After that fire, the alarm system becomes hypersensitive. Smoke detectors trigger at the smallest hint of heat. Doors lock faster. Windows stay sealed, even when there's no fire. Connection becomes the smoke your brain reacts to. Not because danger is guaranteed, but because danger once happened there. And this is where things start getting complicated, because the same system that protects you from emotional pain also begins reshaping your identity. You start telling yourself stories to justify the distance. People are exhausting, relationships are overrated, I work better alone. Those statements feel rational, mature even, but psychologically, they often function as identity preservation bias. Your brain protects the avoidance pattern by convincing you it's part of who you are, not something you learned, something you became. And that belief makes the pattern incredibly difficult to challenge, because questioning it suddenly feels like questioning yourself. But here's the deeper mechanism most people never see. Avoidance doesn't just reduce discomfort, it rewards itself. Every time you withdraw from emotional closeness, your nervous system experiences a drop in perceived threat. Anxiety decreases, the body relaxes. Your brain records that relief as success. This creates what psychologists call an avoidance reinforcement loop. Distance reduces tension. Your brain interprets that as safety, so the behavior repeats. Over time, the loop strengthens until solitude becomes neurologically efficient, predictable, quiet, controlled. And this is the part no one warns you about. The longer the system runs, the less your brain remembers how connection is supposed to feel. Because connection requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires uncertainty, and uncertainty is exactly what your threat circuitry learned to avoid. So something strange starts happening. you don't just prefer being alone, you begin feeling subtly incompatible with closeness itself. You can enjoy people, you can laugh, you can socialize, but the moment relationships start crossing into emotional territory, something inside pulls the emergency brake. Not loudly, quietly. A delayed text, a canceled plan, an unexplained emotional shutdown. And if you look closely, the pattern becomes predictable. The closer someone gets, the more your system begins searching for reasons to step back. This is where it becomes self-sabotage, but not the kind most people imagine. You're not sabotaging connection because you dislike people. You're sabotaging it because your brain believes it's protecting you. The nervous system always prioritizes survival coding over desire, which means the part of you that wants connection and the part of you that avoids it are not enemies. They're running different safety calculations. One remembers the warmth of connection, the other remembers the damage, and the second system usually wins because pain is neurologically louder than hope. But here's the destabilizing truth that shifts the entire picture. When loneliness stops hurting, it's rarely because you healed. It's usually because your brain numbed the signal. Your nervous system didn't solve the wound, it adapted to it. And adaptation can look a lot like strength. This is where it turns. The longer emotional isolation becomes your normal state, the more your brain restructures around it. Social neurobiology shows that repeated behavioral patterns literally rewire neural pathways. The circuits you use most become the ones your brain prioritizes. So if solitude becomes your dominant environment, the brain optimizes for it. Silence becomes comfortable, distance becomes efficient, connection becomes unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things trigger threat detection, which means the exact thing humans are biologically wired to need begins feeling foreign to your system. That contradiction is the quiet tragedy of learned loneliness. Humans are not designed for emotional isolation. The nervous system regulates itself through connection, through eye contact, through voice tone, through shared emotional presence. These interactions stabilize the brain's limbic system and calm stress responses. But when connection disappears long enough, the brain learns to regulate alone. Not perfectly, just sufficiently, which creates the illusion that you no longer need people. But the cost accumulates quietly. Emotional range narrows, trust thresholds rise, relationships begin to feel like effort instead of nourishment. And eventually, something even stranger happens. You stop expecting anyone to truly understand you. Not because people can't, because your brain has stopped presenting the deeper parts of yourself to them. Identity begins shrinking around safety. And here's the prediction most people don't want to hear. If this pattern continues long enough, connection won't just feel difficult, it will start feeling impossible. Not because no one is compatible with you, but because the emotional distance your brain built becomes part of how you exist in the world. A quiet barrier others can sense but not explain. And this brings us back to the question planted at the beginning. Why does connection feel dangerous now? Not because you were meant to be alone, because your brain learned that closeness once came with a cost it didn't know how to handle. So it rewrote the rules. Distance became protection, solitude became stability. But protection systems are not designed to ask whether the threat still exists. They only remember that it once did. Which means the strange discomfort you feel when someone gets emotionally close is not a personality flaw. It's an old survival program still running in the background. The real question isn't whether you're capable of connection. It's whether your brain still believes connection is safe. And that question rarely resolves quickly. Because unlearning a protection pattern requires something your nervous system has spent years avoiding: exposure. Not dramatic exposure, just the quiet, gradual experience of discovering that not every door you open leads back to the same fire. Some people begin noticing this moment when they feel the instinct to withdraw and choose to stay present a few seconds longer. Not comfortable, just curious. That small pause is often where the old pattern starts loosening its grip, because the brain updates its threat maps slowly, experience by experience, signal by signal. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people never reach that moment. They interpret the discomfort of connection as proof they were right to stay distant, and the system continues running, quietly, indefinitely. Which means the difference between someone who remains trapped in learned loneliness and someone who slowly reconnects with people is often just one thing: the willingness to question the identity built around isolation. Not reject it, just examine it. Because sometimes the version of you that prefers being alone isn't the real you. It's the version